What would you do if you stayed in a haunted hotel alone, in the middle of nowhere, where every shadow seems to follow you? This is the terrifying true story that will make you rethink your next vacation destination. It all started innocently enough. Liam, a travel enthusiast from Glasgow, had a habit of seeking out unique destinations for weekend getaways with his closest friends. After months of grueling work, he thought he had finally had enough of the city noise. He started browsing through travel forums when he found an obscure listing, the Ridgeway Inn, buried deep in the Scottish Highlands. The description read, a cozy retreat surrounded by breathtaking wilderness. Pictures of a beautiful stone building were under brooding hills. The catch? It was remote. No Wi-Fi, no phone signal, just peace. Perfect, thought Liam. His friends Emma, Callum, and Sophie all agreed. They packed their bags, eager for a weekend of hiking, good food, and laughter. But from the moment they arrived, something felt off. The drive was long and winding, the narrow roads bordered by dense, towering pines. As their car climbed higher into the highlands, a heavy mist rolled in, shrouding the landscape in an eerie gray haze. When they finally reached the Ridgeway Inn, the sight was both enchanting and unsettling. The building stood solitary against the backdrop of misty hills, its stone facade weathered and cracked. "That's something out of a Gothic novel," Emma cracked, though her voice was uneven. Inside, the innkeeper greeted them. Mr. Mackenzie was a very old man, stooping with age, and his lips were set perpetually in an overstrained smile. His pale eyes, it seemed, went too deeply into each of them. The reception area smelled slightly of damp wood and something metallic. "Welcome to the Ridgeway," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "I'll show you to your rooms." As they followed him down the narrow corridor, the floorboards groaned beneath their feet. Liam observed a faded photograph hanging on the wall. It showed a woman in an old-fashioned dress, her face blank, almost sad. Below this was a plaque with the words, "Evelyn Mackenzie, 1872, 1901. "Family?" Liam asked. Mr. Mackenzie paused, his face darkening. "She was." He said no more. That evening, the group met in the small dining room, where a fire crackled weakly in the hearth. Dinner was hearty, but plain stew, and bread served by the innkeeper without much conversation. After dinner, they retired to the lounge, sipping whiskey and trading ghost stories to match the inn's ominous vibe. "What if this place is haunted?" Sophie teased. "Wouldn't that be fun?" Callum scoffed. "It's just an old inn. Nothing's going to happen." But as the night deepened, the atmosphere grew heavier. Liam couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Shadows seemed to shift unnaturally, and faint creaks echoed from above, as if someone were walking in the rooms upstairs. Later, as Liam lay in bed, he struggled to sleep. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional howl of the wind. Just as he was beginning to drift off, he heard it, a faint, melodic humming. It sounded like a woman's voice, mournful and haunting, coming from somewhere down the hall. Taking a deep breath, Liam entered the corridor. It was empty, but the humming seemed to be coming from behind one of the locked doors. The following morning, Liam told his friends about the humming. Emma paled. "I thought I heard it too," she confessed. "I assumed it was just the wind." Curiosity had the better of them, and they decided to explore the inn. While Mr. Mackenzie was occupied in the kitchen, they ventured into areas marked as private. In one of the dusty, unused rooms, they found an old journal tucked inside a drawer. The name Evelyn Mackenzie was scrawled on the first page. The entries were disjointed but terrifying. Evelyn had written about being alone, in love with a man named Thomas, whom she did not have a chance with, and how despair was slowly overtaking her. The last entry gave Liam goosebumps. January 12, 1901. I can no longer endure this suffering. If peace is not mine in this life, then it will be mine in death. They knew that Evelyn had probably committed suicide in this inn itself. That night, the group's unease increased. Things started to get out of hand. Doors slammed on their own, objects moved inexplicably, and the humming returned, louder and more mournful. While alone in her room, Emma felt an icy hand brush her shoulder. She turned, expecting to see one of her friends, but no one was there. Callum's flashlight flickered out while he was walking down the hall, leaving him in complete darkness. And Liam, checking his phone for the time, saw a reflection in the screen, a woman standing behind him, her face pale and contorted in grief. The group was assembled in the lounge, in shock. "This isn't normal," Sophie said, her voice shaking. "We have to get out of here." But Mr. Mackenzie overheard. "Leaving won't help," he said cryptically. "She'll follow you." Liam demanded answers and went straight to the innkeeper. Mr. Mackenzie finally cracked under the pressure, his voice heavy with guilt. He explained that Evelyn was his great-aunt, who had died tragically in the inn over a century ago. The family had tried to sell the property, but every buyer reported strange happenings and fled. The Mackenzies had no choice but to keep the inn, despite its dark reputation. "She's looking for peace," he said, "but something keeps her here. I don't know how to let her go." The group decided to hold a sort of impromptu séance in order to try and communicate with Evelyn. They sat in the lounge, candles burning as they formed a circle. Liam spoke aloud, speaking directly to Evelyn. "We know your story," he said. "We're here to help you find peace." Something else was happening here. The flame of the candle flames reached bizarrely high for a moment, then died simultaneously. The room remained dark. Standing before them emerged a ghost woman in an old tattered dress with runny tears at her face. Her voice, a whisper, filled with great sorrow. "Why did he leave me?" Realizing she was speaking of Thomas, Liam assured her, "You don't have to wait for him anymore. It's time to move on." Evelyn's form began to fade, her expression softening. The oppressive atmosphere lifted, replaced by a profound stillness. The next morning, the group packed their bags and left the Ridgeway Inn. It looked less menacing as they drove away, almost peaceful. They could not tell if Evelyn really rested, but the humming never came back. Liam would later recount the experience to friends, but he knew most wouldn't believe him. Still, the trip had taught him one thing. Some places carry the weight of the past, and some spirits aren't ready to let go. And sometimes, neither are we. Before we dive deeper into further story, I just want to quickly mention something important. Check this out. According to the stats, 90% of you are watching my videos, but haven't subscribed to the channel yet. If you're enjoying the content, please hit that subscribe button. It only takes a second, and it helps me create more amazing content for you. Your support really means a lot. Let's grow this community together. Imagine a peaceful holiday by the sea, filled with the soothing crash of waves and the salty tang of the ocean breeze. But what happens when the serenity is shattered by a ghostly ship and the spirits aboard know more about your family than you ever could? What do they want, and can you escape them? Emily and her husband, Paul, with their 2 teenagers, Grace and Ethan, were looking forward to their family holiday in Cornwall. The little whitewashed cottage, tucked in the midst of rugged coastline scenery, seemed very inviting to all of them as it faced endless sea on the horizon. The locals spoke of legends, of ships lost to the treacherous rocks and the ghosts that wandered the coastline, but to the Logans, it was just quaint folklore. The first few days had been idyllic. Paul had taken the kids rock pooling. Emily was devouring novels by the fire, and they had spent their evenings playing board games. On the third night, however, a dense fog rolled in and spread over sea and land like an impenetrable alien veil. The lighthouse beam that usually swept across the water was muted, almost swallowed up by the gloom. As they sat on the porch sipping tea, Grace squinted into the fog. "There's something out there," she said, pointing toward the sea. Emily followed her daughter's gaze. At first, it was just a smudge in the mist, but as the minutes passed, a shadowy shape emerged. It was a ship, its silhouette barely visible. The sails hung limp, and the hull seemed battered by time. Paul laughed. "Must be one of those tourist things, maybe a replica of an old ship." But Emily's stomach churned. "It's not moving, it's just floating." Ethan pulled out his phone to take a picture, but when he aimed it at the ship, the screen went black. He frowned, tapping it. "Weird. My phone just died." Grace's voice trembled. "It's not supposed to be there, is it?" The next day, the fog had lifted and the ship was gone. Paul brushed off the previous night as a trick of the light and fog, but Emily couldn't shake the unease. As they ventured into the nearby village, she overheard a conversation between two elderly fishermen. "Saw the lady in mourning last night," one said, shaking his head. "Means trouble's coming." Emily's curiosity got the better of her. "Excuse me," she said. "What's the lady mourning?" The men exchanged wary glances. "A ghost ship," one finally said, "lost at sea centuries ago. They say she appears when there's unfinished business or a debt to be paid." Emily's heart raced. What kind of debt? The fisherman's eyes darkened. "Family debts, blood debts. You'd best stay away from the cliffs at night, miss." That evening, Emily shared what she'd heard with Paul. He dismissed it with a laugh, but Grace and Ethan seemed unsettled. "What if it's real?" Ethan asked. "Ghost ships aren't real," Paul said firmly. "It's just a story to scare tourists." But that night, the fog returned, and so did the ship. Grace woke first, her bedroom overlooking the sea. The ghostly vessel was closer now, its details more vivid. She could see the tattered sails, the barnacle-encrusted hull, and figures moving on the deck. Shadowy, indistinct, yet undeniably human. She ran to wake her parents. This time, even Paul couldn't deny it. The ship seemed almost alive, its presence oppressive, as if it were watching them. Suddenly, a faint wailing sound floated through the air. It was mournful, chilling, and unmistakably from the direction of the ship. Ethan clutched his sister's arm. "What do they want?" No one had an answer. The next day, Emily dug into the local records at the small village library. She discovered that the Lady Mourning was a merchant ship wrecked on the Cornwall coast in 1783. All hands were lost. The captain was also killed, Elias Morland. A shiver ran down her spine when she saw the name. Morland was her mother's maiden name. When she shared this discovery with the family, Paul finally looked concerned. "So, what are you saying? That this ghost ship is connected to your family?" Emily nodded. "Maybe it's trying to tell us something." Grace's voice was barely above a whisper. "Or warn us." They were determined to face the ship that night. Equipped with flashlights and a deepening sense of fear, they headed towards the cliffs. The fog was now thicker than ever, and the air was heavy, almost asphyxiating. The ship was waiting for them. It loomed over them, far closer to the shore than they had ever imagined. The wailing sound grew louder, almost deafening. And then they saw them, the ghosts. People with tattered clothing walked on the deck, and their faces looked pale and empty. One of them stepped forward, a man in a captain's coat. He raised a hand, pointing directly at Emily. "You have to pay the debt," a voice echoed, not from the man, but from everywhere and nowhere at the same time. Emily took another step forward, shaking. "What debt? What do you want from us?" The captain's face contorted in grief. "Your bloodline doomed us. Elias Morland betrayed his crew, stole their share, left them to die. His debt is yours." Emily's knees gave way. Grace and Ethan rushed to her side. "That was centuries ago." Paul shouted, "You can't hold her responsible." The spirit's wailing grew louder, drowning out his voice. The captain's gaze never wavered. The debt must be paid. In the following days, the haunting consumed the family. Night after night, the ship reappeared, nearer and nearer. Objects in the house moved themselves. Whispers filled the air. Grace dreamt of drowning. Ethan saw ghostly faces in every reflection. Desperate, Emily went back to the library. She found an old journal written by Elias Morland himself. In it, he confessed to stealing from his crew and abandoning them during a storm. His final entry read, "They will come for me, and if not me, my blood." Emily realized there was only one way to end this. They had to return what was stolen. With the help of the villagers, they pieced together a ritual. They would offer restitution, gold coins from the era found in a local museum, and a heartfelt apology to the spirits. On the seventh night, as the fog thickened and the ship loomed closer than ever, the family stood on the cliffs. Emily stepped forward, holding the coins. Her voice trembled as she spoke. "To the crew of the Lady Morning, I offer these coins as restitution. I am sorry for the pain my ancestor caused you. Please, let us be free." The captain reappeared, his ghostly form shimmering. He reached out, and as his hand touched the coins, they dissolved into light. The wailing ceased. The fog began to lift. The captain's eyes relaxed. The debt is paid. The ship vanished, outline becoming indistinct until it disappeared. The family stood silent, the burden of generations finally removed. They departed Cornwall the next day, forever changed. The Logans never spoke of the Lady Morning again, but they carried the memory with them, a haunting reminder of the past's grip on the present. For years, Grace had dreamed of going on a vacation in the Florida Keys. And so, when her best friend Maya surprised her with an exclusive private island retreat for her 30th birthday, Grace could hardly believe her luck. Their small group of friends, Maya, Jake, Aaron, and Kyle, buzzed with excitement as they loaded their bags onto the sleek motorboat that would take them to paradise. The captain, a weathered man with sun-creased skin, gave them a peculiar look as they set off. "Y'all sure about this island?" he asked. His voice carried a faint tremor, but before anyone could respond, he revved the engine and the mainland disappeared behind them. The island was breathtaking. Luminous, clear water was lapping across the white shores, and on it lush vegetation dancing with gentle winds. To one side sat an extensive, expansive villa where the whitened walls reflected vivid light through afternoons filled with sunlight. "This is amazing," whispered Maya, shooting photographs. Grace nodded, but a shiver crept up her spine. This beauty was heavy and oppressive. The birds were missing, the chirping of tiny animals. Even the waves filled the air with a deafening silence. Their host, an old man by the name of Edgar, stepped out of the villa. His eyes nervously flickered as he greeted them. "Welcome," he said, his voice gravelly. "Enjoy your stay, but I'll warn you now. Stay inside after dark, and if you hear anything unusual, ignore it." Jake laughed awkwardly. "What kind of welcome is that?" Edgar's face darkened. "Just remember what I said," he muttered before retreating into the villa. The first day went uneventfully. They swam, they lounged by the pool, and they explored the island. By sunset, however, an undercurrent of unease had settled over the group. Grace saw strange carvings on some of the trees, spirals, eyes, and symbols that looked ancient. Probably some old native markings, Kyle speculated, but his voice lacked conviction. That night, as they gathered for dinner, Edgar appeared again. His face was pale, his hands trembling. "I'm leaving tonight," he said abruptly. "Boat's coming for me. You'd be wise to leave too." Maya frowned. "What? Why?" Edgar hesitated. "This island, it's cursed. People think it's a paradise, but it's not. The cult that once lived here, they left something behind, and it's still hungry." He disappeared in the night before they could ask him any more. They attempted to brush it off as mere quirkiness by Edgar. However, that night, Grace woke to faint chanting sounds. It came from everywhere and nowhere at the same time. She was running her heart at this point and quietly crept towards the window. The forest was alive with unnatural shadows, as if they had been guided by an unseen force. She jolted Maya awake. "Do you hear that?" Mia listened groggily, her eyes widening as the chanting grew louder. "What the hell is that?" The group was in the living room, all of them hearing the same strange noises. Jake tried to appear braver than he felt, saying they should check it out. Equipped with flashlights, they headed into the woods. The clearing lay deep in the forest. At its center, a stone altar stood. It was stained dark with something long dried onto it. More carvings surrounded it. Some of them depicted human figures suffering in torment. Aaron gasped, "This is not just an altar, it's a sacrificial site." Kyle's flashlight went dark. One by one, their lights went out. They plunged into darkness, their chanting becoming deafening as shadowy figures emerged from the trees. Not human, their twisted, elongated limbs and hollow eyes caught the faint light of the moon. "Run, run," Grace screamed. They ran out of the villa and slammed the doors shut behind them. Shadows gathered against the windows, their bodies contorting in sinuous ways. Grace reached for her phone. No signal. Mia wailed, "What is happening?" "It is them," Aaron murmured, "the people the cult took. They are still here, trapped inside." Jake tried to bar the door, but it opened with a force that sent him crashing to the floor. One of the shadows slipped inside, its touch icy and suffocating. Kyle grabbed a chair and swung it, but the shadow dissipated, reforming instantly. "We can't fight them," Grace yelled. "We need to find a way off this island." They discovered Edgar's emergency radio in the villa's supply closet. Grace desperately called for help, but only static answered. Then a distorted voice came through. "You can't leave. It won't let you." Panic erupted as the shadows invaded the villa. The group was split up one by one. Kyle and Aaron disappeared into the darkness, their screams ringing through the halls. Grace held on to Maya, her mind racing. "The boat," Maya whispered. "If we can make it to the dock." They ran through the forest, the shadows closing in behind them. When they reached the dock, the motorboat was gone. Despair washed over them until they spotted a small rowboat tied to the pier. "Hurry," Grace urged. The shadows twisted along the shore, unable to move out into the water as they paddled. But the chanting never stopped. It cut through the waves with a chilling reminder that the curse of the island was not done. Weeks had passed, and Grace was now sitting alone in her apartment, scrolling through news articles regarding the island. The island was shut off as a result, with safety concerns making it unsafe for people to visit. No one could believe their tale, calling it hysteria. Yet each night, she heard the chanting in her dreams, and at times she felt shadows in the corner of her room. Maya had stopped talking to her, retreating into silence. The trauma had fractured their friendship, leaving Grace isolated. But she knew one thing for sure: the island's darkness had followed them, and it was only a matter of time before it claimed them too. A vacation on a private island sounds like heaven, right? Not when it's haunted by an ancient cult. Watch as a group of friends unravels a nightmare they never saw coming.